let's get started then. A couple minutes late here, but okay. Anyway, so yeah, so today is our last day in our session for our spring 2019 workshops on virtual reality. And I'm presenting on Unity and getting VR into Unity. So we're going to concentrate on the VR part and just kind of do some trivial little stuff as far as the world goes. But Unity actually offers a lot of power these days for doing quick VR. We had a good, I think, a good semester here. And these are all so for those of you just joining us, all of the workshop sessions and I think 2 or 3 of the expeditions have been recorded and available on our Canvas site. Actually, the last couple aren't on the Canvas site yet. It takes the media group a couple of weeks to get those to me. And so we'll have all of them up though within a week or 2. There is still 2 more sessions on the Digital Humanities and Creative Activities groups workshop series, which meets Thursdays at 4 o'clock over in the Wells Library. Tomorrow, Matt Mercer and Tassie Gennady will be talking about creating your own VR tour using 360 cameras and technologies such as that. And then Jeff Rogers will close that one out with an XR or virtual reality / augmented reality / mixed reality extravaganza. So look forward to that. All right, so today's topic is Unity extravaganza. So I'm gonna do a real quick introduction to Unity. So it's been around since 2005, it was released for the Mac, initially mostly as a 2D platform, but after 10 years through March 2015, Unity 5 came out, was pretty solid, worked on multiple platforms, including phones, Linux, PC, Mac, some TVs, both iPhones and Androids, and so it was a pretty strong product at that point, and did 3D as well. In 2017, they started going to the year numbering system, and so they released version 2017.1, and as of a few days ago, the latest version is 2018.3.12, so they're a little behind in their years, I guess. But that's the latest version, and that's the version I actually installed on my laptop here, so that's the one we'll be looking at. And again, it creates 3D or 2D games. We can use some of the 2D aspects, the text and some of the planar stuff as part of our user interface, so that still serves us well for virtual reality. Unity is freely available for non-professional use, and for educational use, you can get, we have some licenses for Indiana University, and other universities can do the same. You can download your own copy and use it. You have to tell it that you're not making any money, tell them that you're not, or making less than $100,000, I should say. Otherwise, your professional options, there's a pair of them. One is the Plus option, which is $25 a month with the multi-month subscription, and the Pro is $125 a month. But everything I'm doing today is the free version, so you don't need to worry about those unless you're starting to make some serious money. Interestingly enough, Unity has grown so much in the last few years that they have different support teams for different categories of users. Of course, starting with gaming and online gaming, big online gaming services. But also they have a group that specializes in auto and transportation, one that works on real-time animated movies, another one that works in architecture, engineering, and construction area, and a group just for gambling. They have a support team just for gambling. All right, so let's do Unity Editor Basics. I'm gonna try and do stuff live here, but I'll show us a few slides first. So when you start Unity, this is kind of the first thing you'll see is whether you want to start a new project or open an existing project. I'll start one here. I'll start one that will be a new project, and we'll just give it a demo name there. And then when we start it up, you'll see an editor that looks like this. If you're the first time you've started Unity, it'll look a little different than this. This is my preferred layout. It's called the 3x2 layout, and it has the scene view here and the game view here. I like to see them both at the same time, so I'm testing things in the game. I can get like a God's eye view in the scene view. And so that's the version I use, and you can change that with this layout button in the upper right, which is miscircled there. So there's a bunch of different windows and panes plus a toolbar. I'll point out all of these. I won't spend much time on those. But at the top of the toolbar is, this is our little or at the top of the window is the toolbar. There's some buttons here over here on the left. We won't worry about those two. Here's the play button. That's one of our important buttons. And then here's the layout button. This actually says default, and you can see it has the shared scene window kind of hidden right there. All right, so here's what these tools do. The hand one lets you kind of do multiple things depending on which mouse button you press. But then if you go to the other ones, and that's the grab, so you press Q for that. So you'll notice that this is the first 5 things, or 6 characters on the top of your keyboard. So that's Q, W, E, R, T, and then there's a new one that's not shown here. So that there's a new button that does all 3 of them. But anyway, translate, rotate, scale, those are your main ones. And you'll see these different symbols. So you see the arrows for translate coming out of the origin. You'll see a sphere with some colored lines to tell you which axis you're rotating around, and then boxes at the end of the axes if you're scaling. Oh yes, and when you click on one, it'll change from its red, green, or blue color to be yellow to highlight which direction you're going to scale, rotate, or move. All right, so when I switch over to live, we'll be creating a cube. And so there's a create menu under the hierarchy tab. And so there's a bunch of 3D objects. We'll look at those in a minute. I'm going to create a cube. And then if you're following along, watching this video later, you can play around with these different transformations on the cube. I probably won't spend our time today on that. But here's kind of a reiteration of them and tells which mouse buttons do which in the various forms. All right. Oh, and one kind of very nice feature of Unity is that the documentation is pretty superb. If you install it, it'll install help on your system, and there's like an online manual. But you can also get to the same manual through the web, and you can even go to different versions. So if you're switching between versions of Unity, you can tell it which manual version you want to access if you're like working on a project. Usually you don't want to switch versions of Unity on the same project, so you'll stick with a version throughout a project, and so for that reason you'll want to go and maybe look at some older documentation. All right, so let's switch over to live Unity, which I'll have to start because I had to reboot my computer. And so like I said, I installed the latest version of Unity on this system, so that's the one we'll start. That's 2018.3.12 F1. And it takes a moment to start, and I'll get a drink. I'll do that. All right, here we go. All right, so I've got one called Unity Extrav there already. Actually, I will start that one, and then I'll create a new scene. So I'll cheat a little bit for the sake of time. And it's starting Steam for me because there's Steam in that project. So you'll notice down here in the lower part of my window, it's starting Steam, although it's telling me to reset the headset, which is disconcerting. We don't need the headset yet. I'll go ahead and say to reset. All right, it was, I'm gonna bring the chat up over here. All right, we're good. All right, so here we go. So here's our world, our empty world. It's got Steam already loaded. And under assets, there should be, oh, there we go. Looks like Steam is coming up. That's good. Steam VR, I should say. And Steam is going to block my screen for a moment.
These are two distinct apps. Are you using them in tandem?
Oh, it wants me to configure. Yeah. What do you mean two distinct apps? Oh, yes, Unity and Steam VR, yes. So Margaret asked whether these are two distinct things. Yes, so Steam VR is a product of Valve that works with the Steam system. It runs and uses a protocol called OpenVR, which isn't really open, but is also created by Valve. And so Unity and Steam VR interface through the OpenVR protocol, and other systems can likewise do the same. I'm actually going to do a quick impromptu calibration here, since this is the first time we've used this in here. So I'm doing room setup. It's telling me to move the furniture out of the way. We're here in a nice big empty space, so that's easy. Headset is on. I'll turn my controllers on. And we already have tracking set up in this room, so that saves some time for us. All right, oh, the headset. You have to wiggle the headset every now and then to keep it awake. All right, so it sees everybody. It wants me to point at a screen. It actually is, that's actually the opposite direction of where it will make the front facing for when you're in virtual reality. It assumes you're going to turn around to do that. And the next step here is to put the controllers on the floor so that the trackers know how far it is down to the floor, hanging from the ceiling. Good. And then one last step is we tell it our space. And I'm going to do the quick method where I go to 4 corners. So I'll go behind the camera here. So hopefully that's big enough. It does have a minimum size and we fit that, so that's good. So that's how you configure a Vive. Pretty easy. So for those of you who haven't seen that before, a little bonus thing there. So yay, it's party time. Okay. Could not start Steam VR home. Well, that's okay. We don't need a home. We'll live without our home. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and create a few things. I may have these on future slides, but that's okay. So looks good. We're going to create a 3D object that's a cube. And I'm actually going to call this floor because we're going to make it so it's no longer cube shaped, just a parallel pipe bed. Floor. And I'll shape it to be 100 by tab. Where's the tab? Tab. 0.1 tall by another 100 meters. Units in Unity are in meters. I'm going to center it here. Somehow I got uncentered. Okay, and here's the scene. So here's our scene. I just created this floor. I can use my mouse to rotate around, up and down, rotate the world. So it's in this, here's this 6th button here. So now we can see all 6 of the buttons. When I click on the mouse, you can actually see it switches. If I click on the right mouse, it switches to rotate mode. But I can go in specific rotate mode here too. All right, so that's enough of that. Let's add a cube real quick that floats in the air. Oh, I'm in rotate mode. So I grab the green, you can see the green arrow turned yellow when it was the thing that was grabbed. I'm zoomed way out so we can't see the cube very well. We can see its shadow when I raise it above. There we go. So there's the cube. Unity has built-in shadows. It has some built-in physics, which we don't have turned on at the moment. And so there's a very simple world. So I'm going to go back to my slides to make sure I keep my place. And we'll move this aside, a little more aside. Okay, so let's build our world. So I've already done some of this. I jumped ahead a little bit when we were going live. So for me, I consider there to be kind of 4 main types of objects when you're creating a virtual world. So here we're going a little to discussion of designing a space. So geography, that's what we made our floor. So it's the terrain that we walk around on. The other thing I created was an artifact, a simple cube, but that'll be things like, you know, trees and statues, fences, things that are in the world. Two other types that I haven't created in the work, we'll look at a little bit. We won't have agents. So agents are like characters in the world, non-player characters, or I guess we could also put other live player characters in there, could be those as well. And finally, there's user interface, which we'll look at in a little bit. In this case, there's a model of a hand, which we'll have, and then there's instructions of how to use the controlling device that you have, which Unity also provides. So we'll see some user interface. But for the moment, we've added some terrain and some artifacts. Here's kind of how things are structured in Unity. It uses a standard, what we call a scene graph, which is a relational graph, which says the arrow means the item at the back of the arrow belongs to the item at the head of the arrow. Let me see, someone's chatting. Can Unity create stuff for the Daydream platform? So yes, so Unity can create things for phone-based VR and all-in-one VRs. It's pretty solid in the things that it can handle. Along with PCs, the Vive doesn't work real well on Macs or I should say, Steam VR doesn't work very well on Macs and Linux yet. The Vive can be made to run on those platforms, but that's not so easy through Unity. All right, good question there. So anyway, this is a relationship. So this is a more complicated world. We're not going to have things like tanks and things like that, but you can see that the light that we do have in the world, that's part of our virtual world. We're going to add some blocks, maybe stack them up into columns. So those will be part of the virtual world. Our floor, our terrain is part of the virtual world. And our player will be part of the virtual world too. So all these things belong, and we can move them around. If they belong to something, if I move the wall around, if I had a wall, anything that belongs to that wall moves with it. And so that's where the relationships really come into benefit. And so this is just kind of a little computer science background. We call this a tree. It looks more like a root system. So if we flip it over, it looks more like a tree or a bush maybe. Anyway, back to Unity. So I talked about there are a bunch of different panes, bunch of panels that go together to make up that Unity editor interface. The hierarchy pane, which is the one in the middle I was using, that's one where we add new objects, and it has that relational graph built into it. So far, everything I've created is just a child of the root of the virtual world. And so that has everything that's contents. In Unity, everything is called a game object, so everything are basically the same at the core, or have the same properties, and then you can add different components to those. And so any of the circles in our tree, those are all game objects, regardless of whether they're the sun or the player or a wall. Each of those has things called components, and that's what really then causes the differentiation between objects. And all of the objects have at least one component, which is the transform, which means where is it in the world, relative to actually what's above it in the tree. So you'll see whenever you create any object, even an empty game object, it will still have a transformation, so you can move that empty game object around, and sometimes you'll put other things under an empty game object. So a transformation basically lets you change the location, orientation, or scale of any object, and we've already done that. We changed the scale of the floor, that cube we created. We made it a big, wide kind of plane, and we changed the location of the cube that we created so that it was hanging in midair. And in addition to moving around, you can actually type those numbers directly in, which is what I did do. If you could rewind the tape and watch a little bit. So I talked about in the last slide, I didn't say the word, but we talk about things in Cartesian coordinates, which is just your standard X, Y, and Z. So kind of a fancy word based on the philosophy of René Descartes, which is where the word comes from. And we talk about rotations in this case as Euler angles. So it's rotations about those three axes, X, Y, and Z. There are other ways to represent rotations, and in fact, underlying the interface, Unity does use a technique called Euler, or quaternions rather, to interface it. But when the user, on the user interface end, it talks about X, Y, and Z's because they're a little easier to think about, although if you're trying to do all three at once, it gets a little complicated. There's on the far right in my layout is the inspector plane. And so here's a game object that's empty, but it still has its transformation. And then it has a button called Add Component. And you can see these are all hierarchy menus. You can see they all have arrows at the side. So there's a bunch of different things under each of these where you can add different components. So you can add physics, you can add sound to different objects, change how it's rendered, add a script to it so you can have cause interaction through the scripts, and we'll see a little bit of that later today. And so these are kind of the main things that are objects that are in the world. So if I create a mesh, that's one of the things I can have. Or not, I guess scripts aren't necessarily, but these are kind of the main components, I guess. I misread it. These are the main things that you'll use if you're using Unity as kind of a beginner. The camera and the light are created by default for you, and you have to create all the objects and things like that in the world. We will use a special camera for virtual reality, but Unity provides that for us. When you go to create new objects, under the create menu, there's a 3D object. There's a list of 9 things or 10 things here, 11 I guess. The top 6 are kind of general shapes, and then the bottom 5 are kind of specialty things. So you can create terrain and make rolling hills pretty easily, kind of just paint mountains and things like that. You can create it says tree, but it's really vegetation, so you can have grasses and shrubs and trees. And kind of sprinkle those around your world. So within a few minutes, you can create an interesting terrain. And I'll talk about a video that one of my colleagues created that shows how to do that pretty quickly, but we won't do that today. We're going to stick with the very simple objects today. There's other ways to get objects though, so you can import them through the asset store. Unity has a nice asset store. I'll call that up in just a minute and just show you that. You can also do your own modeling through Maya or Blender, and you can create objects through a technique called photogrammetry, which is talked about in the Cyber Humanities and Digital Humanities and Creative Arts group workshops. And then again, we can have some of these simple shapes for creating the user interface, or what the game industry refers to as white boxing, where if you want to make a puzzle and test that out as a in-game thing, instead of creating all the texture maps and all the fine detailed objects, make sure it works as a game before you spend that time, and that's called white boxing because everything looks kind of white like our world so far. So we've already created a cube, and so we've seen this already, and the cube has a mesh, which is kind of the polygons, and it has a collider, so you know when objects contact each other. And the first cube we had, we called floor. Well, actually, I didn't do this part, but I did scale it. We could lower it down a little bit. Otherwise, I just brought up the object. And then if you saw, I didn't run play, but if you go into play mode, you'll see that the cube just sits there. It doesn't really do anything. So you actually have to tell Unity that you want something to happen to that object. So you have to go into what's called play mode. And while we're talking about play mode, one of the, I think, very important things to do is know when you are in play mode versus editing mode. And that's because when you're in play mode, you can still modify the world, but when you exit play world, all the changes you made while in play mode stays there and doesn't come out. So you lose all those changes, which is good if you want to kind of experiment and then go back to where you started. But if you want to save those changes, then you're out of luck. So it's very important, I think, to make sure you know when you're in play mode. And so Unity provides this thing called play mode tint, which gives you a color. I like something kind of light so you can still read the text. And I'll show you that when we jump back from the slides. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do when we go back to slides then is take our cube and add a rigid body to it. That's part of the physics system, and which is one of our components. And now the cube has the gravity in the world will affect that cube. So we had gravity before, but the cube wasn't affected by it. And so now if we lift up the cube while we're in play mode, it'll fall down. And when we stop, all those changes that happen in the world will be lost, and the cube will return to where it started, which is what we want, as long as we know what we're doing. So let's go ahead and try that out. I'll jump back to Unity here. So here's our cube. I didn't go into play mode before. You can see I have a little purple tint, and when I go into play mode, nothing happens. I can go ahead and move this cube. Let's move it way over there. And when I go out of play mode, it jumps back. Okay, so that's what we wanted. I want to show real quickly where the changes are. If you go to Edit, Preferences, General, Colors, here it is, Colors. And let me make this a little wider so we can see it. And right here in the middle, they've added some at the top that you didn't used to be there. Play mode used to be the very top item. But here it is here, and you can change that color by clicking on it and getting a little color wheel and making changes. So very important, I think, to use that. Otherwise, you'll lose work and you'll be mad. You'll wish you had. All right, so now let's add physics to this cube. So the cube is selected over here. There's an add component button here. I've got a little search thing from when I was working before. Let's go to physics, not physics 2D. We want 3D physics. And we're going to add a rigid body to that cube. And so the cube, I'll use the mouse here, has different properties. We're going to leave the default for now, but you can give it how much mass it is, which actually I don't know what the units are there, but there's a mass for that. There's angular drag, so if it's in motion, if it's in rotational motion, it'll gradually slow down. Here the drag itself for translational motion is 0, in which case it won't slow down. And you can turn gravity on and off for this object. By default, it's on because that's typically why you've added physics to the object. Also, you get collision detection when you add a rigid body. And so that's important for a lot of things, but we won't discuss that. But let's at least go into play mode here and see what happens. Starts the game and the cube falls. I should, because I have Steam on here, my game mode actually is following the head-mounted display already. So that happens as soon as I installed Steam VR and started Steam, the plugin, it does that automatically for you. That's a new feature, actually. It didn't used to do that. You had to create a new camera type to do that. All right, and if I go out of play mode, the cube jumps back to where it was, and our camera, I don't think, is not tracking anymore. So now when I move the head-mounted display around, our world doesn't change. All right, let's jump back to the slides. Okay. Ah, yes. So what if there were no floor then, right? What's going to happen then? So what we can do, we can turn objects on and off. So even if they're in that scene graph that we have, we can pretend like they're not there by unselecting this little checkbox next to the name. Pardon me. And so let's find out what happens to the cube. So we'll just jump right back to Unity. And so floor, we'll turn off floor. So it disappears from our scene. We'll press play. And once it starts, there goes our cube. And if I get my head-mounted display, there it is way down there, and it's falling, 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 falling. And we can't see it anymore. All right. So one thing that we can see, though, is where the cube is, because even in play mode, it's updating these values here. So you can see that this Y value is rapidly increasing, and because gravity is an acceleration, it's going faster and faster and faster down. All right, so we're going to get to VR in just a moment here. Oh, let me, yeah, I can move that, I think. Sorry. All right, so let me do that again real quick then. And then we're going to jump into VR. All right, so here's the number falling and going down, 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 down. All right, very good. Thank you. All right, oh, so our next thing is light and making more objects. So let me just quickly do that then while we're here, and then we'll stream through the slides. So light was already created. Oh, let me turn the floor back on too. All right, so there's our floor. A light was already created for us when it started. It has this little yellowish sun kind of color. If we look at it, the representation of it, because it's directional, it has these kind of rays coming down. So I can go into rotation mode and change that. And you can see that the sky is changing when I do that. I can rotate it this way. You can see when I make it lower, I get longer shadows, kind of sunset shadows. And it also gives me, the skybox also gives me a kind of a sunset feel. So that's a special feature of what's called a directional light. It pretends it's the sun. It's so far away that where it's located is negligible. And so if I move that around, it actually has no effect whatsoever because it's not really here, it's really far away in space. So that's a directional light. We can also have positional lights or spotlights, but save that for another time. The other thing that I was going to do was I can take this object, put it down on the floor, and if I hit Control D on a PC, I can duplicate that object you see in the hierarchy. It created a new one, and then I can stack this one above it a little bit, create a new one, stack it. All right, that's all we'll do there. And if I press play, they'll settle down on each other. All right, and in the slides I talk about creating a new material, but because I loaded the SteamVR package, there actually are some materials already there. And I'm going to go to one that's in the Longbow materials, and I'll take this, we'll take this archery one, put it there. All right, so this now, one of those cubes has a little target on it. So that's a little material we have. All right, so again, we're focused today on virtual reality, so I'm not going to talk really a lot about that. So back to the slides, which I have a little bit more details in the slides. So if you want to see that, here's more about the light. So we can try, moving it doesn't have an effect, rotating it does. That's what the slide says. So here I use Control D and I can stack them. Here's some shortcuts that are handy. So Control Z, of course, is important. Kind of your standard undo. Shift F will fly to whatever object is under the mouse. So if you want to kind of zoom in on an object, and if you wanted to get those cubes to stack better, you could do vertex snapping if you hold the V key down. And here's how to create your own material. So there's in addition to creating objects, you can create a material, and then it gives you this option of creating different colors and transparencies and shininess. The main one then is the albedo. So I had made in this example a green one, which let me make a stack with a green cube in the middle. What you do is you can actually just drag the material asset onto any number of objects, and as soon as you do, it'll change that color. Oh, and you can make a stack. So I'll show that. I'll go ahead. This is part of that hierarchy. So let's go back to Unity for one last thing. So I have 3 cubes that are in my little simple column. I can create an empty object, and I'll name that object column. All right, and then I can select all 3 of the cubes and drag them to be a child of column. And now, if I move column around, I move all the cubes together as one object. And so that's part of that hierarchy that we talked about at the beginning. And I can also hide the objects under column. You'll see that these are indented to indicate that they're child nodes of the column. All right, and now we're going to go to VR. All right, so you've actually already seen that adding VR to our worlds was pretty simple because I didn't even do anything, and all of a sudden the Vive was working, at least the head-based part of the Vive was working. And so that's because I had already installed the SteamVR plugin to save us some time. I'll go and I'll show you some of these steps. So Unity has this asset store. If you just search for SteamVR, it'll show you several things, several options. The one that we're looking for is the one by Valve Corporation. It's free, so that's nice. So you can click on it and then you import it. And then once you've imported it, you actually have to say that you want to use it. Or first you download it, I guess, then you import it. And then it'll ask you several questions, which I'm not showing the picture of, but you'd basically say yes, give me all the defaults, and it'll say, yes, that's great. So here's actually some of those pictures. So here's the asset store. Here's what the logo looks like for SteamVR. You click on import. You'll get this listing here of all the stuff that's part of SteamVR. And you can actually choose to not include some stuff. So for example, that longbow stuff, if you weren't going to use the archery stuff or any of its materials, you could turn that off and not load it and save yourself some memory in the system. There's a whole lot of sounds in here. If you're not going to do any of the sounds, you can save yourself some time and memory by not including the sounds. For today, I just included everything. And then here's some of those options where it says, do you want to do all these things? And you say, okay. And then it's under the talking thing here. And then it tells you you made the right choice if you did say okay. Except if you said accept all. So let me move the talking over here. So there it's accept all right there. Oops, maybe that was the wrong mouse right there. Okay. So that's basically it for getting SteamVR installed. When you do that, under Assets Prefabs, it has some objects that SteamVR is going to use. For the most part, the one you're interested in is the camera rig one, and that's our simple add VR to our world system. Now, as I said, the new version of SteamVR actually does that for all cameras. In the old version, the regular cameras stayed as regular cameras, but now they get the VR feature for free. But Camera Rig has some extra options, like it tells you where your play area is, and it adds the controllers. So you can see where the controllers are when you do the Camera Rig. So really, we're going to want to add that Camera Rig to our scene. We've already done this step, so we want to make sure that SteamVR is going. Actually, if you have SteamVR installed, when you press play, it'll automatically do this, as we already saw. With just the main camera, we don't see the controllers. So we can walk around and see our cube or our stack of cubes, but that's about all. So if we want to add a little bit more to our VR, we're going to drag Camera Rig to our hierarchy up at the root level. We're going to disable the main camera because we won't be using that. And then we'll press the play button, and we'll see that we can now see the controllers. And in the scene world, it'll show us the play area. So let's go ahead and do that. So here's our assets. Here's SteamVR and all the stuff below it. And so I'm going to close Interaction System for a moment. It's under Prefabs. And you'll see when I click on it, it shows me the sub-level items over here. So here's some models. If I do this glove left, oh, it doesn't show. I thought it would show it bigger. It's just a little tiny icon. We'll see that later. Anyway, here's the camera rig. So I'm going to drag the camera rig into our hierarchy. There it is. Now we don't need the main camera, so I'm going to do what I did with Floor earlier and turn it off. And so now our camera rig is there. Now if I zoom out, if I double click, our camera rig's way over there, whereas the column is way over here. So let's go ahead and bring those two together so that our column is kind of next where we can see it. All right, so if I click on the camera rig, you see this outline. That's the outline of our tracked space. And we can actually affect that. Actually, that's configured to be 3 meters by 2¼ meters. I can click Calibrated, which will use the configuration that I created earlier today. Or I can set it to some of these specific sizes, like very small, 2 meters by 1.5 meters. I'll go back to the 3 meters by 2¼ All right, so that tells us what our play area is, where we can walk around. And now, if I press play, all right, so we're right next to our stack. We can see it there, but our controller's turned off. So let me turn on this controller. And when it activates, oh, we should be able to see it. Maybe because it wasn't on when we started. Let me go ahead and get the other controller. I'm going to stop and start, see if that helps us out. Because SteamVR runs a bunch of things. A bunch of things happen when you press play and have SteamVR, and so there's a good chance. Oh, it's still not seeing the controllers, which is slightly baffling. Oh, I know why. I think I need to zero the main camera. Oh, that didn't work. Let's see if we can see the controllers floating around somewhere. All right, let me zero that. If this doesn't work, we won't worry about it because we're going to move on anyway. Camera leg looks fine. All right, not sure what happened there, but I will have to debug that later. Your camera rig is supposed to bring up the controllers, and I think it even says that in the slides. So the slides don't lie, the computer lied to me. All right, here's what I just did. I dragged the camera rig from our assets over into the thing, and I don't show it here, but I disabled the main camera. Here it is. I disabled the main camera. I turned on the controllers and pressed play, and so here it's not showing controllers in these pictures. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it doesn't show the controllers by default. I thought it did. Anyway, so that's very simple VR. So now let's look at some of the new features that Unity has added to Steam VR. And so that's with the Steam VR 2.x series. It's now at 2.2. And so that adds this new input system, which helps map things. So when Steam VR first came out, it was kind of dedicated mostly for the Vive. But of course, a lot of other consumer head-mounted displays are also on the market. And so they've made it now so that you can map inputs more easily, less hardware dependent than it used to be. And so there's a little bit more effort on our part. We'll have to do a couple more clicks, but it's not really super difficult. All right, so we're going to do that by clicking on all these things. There's a new thing called Steam VR Input, and I have pictures that go along with these in a moment. So here's the pictures that go with those things. So if it's the first time you've done it, it'll say, it looks like you haven't done this before. You say yes. It looks like you're missing your configuration JSON file called actions.json. Say yes. So actually, I've already done that since I've loaded in this package, so we won't need to do that. And then it'll show us some of these mappings, some of the things we can map. And so teleporting is one of the things we're going to use. We're going to add our own action after that, and then we're going to save and generate, and then we'll have that mapping. We'll have the default mapping. All right, then we'll have a world that looks like this. So maybe that's why we don't have it. Oh, and I made the floor brown too. So I used the longbow system to make the floor brown. So let's see. Oh yeah, so we'll do that real quick, and then we're going to add jumping around. And we'll see how easy it is to add jumping around. So I already forgot what I was going to do. Oh yes. So there's window, Steam VR input, and here's that panel that I had before. You'll see it has, here's teleport, so it tells you what needs to be done for teleport. It's all set up by default. We'll save and generate. And then we'll get rid of that window. Now, in theory, well, let's see if that save and generate helps bring our controllers into view. No, it does not. All right, something has gone wrong on that, but again, I'll have to put corrections in the slides when I post them. All right, let's continue on and show how easy it is to add teleporting. All right, so there's actually two different types of teleporting. There's areas that you can jump around kind of at your discretion, and then there's point-to-point jumping. I'll show both of those. So for those, though, we need the player instead of the camera rig. So we're going to get rid of the camera rig. We're going to add the player. In the previous slide, this is what we should have seen with the camera rig. We should have seen the controllers, kind of vanilla controllers that mimic the shape of the, sorry, I'm trying to talk and do something at the same time. How does this move? Oops. Oh, wrong mouse, that's why. Okay. I'm way ahead. Oh, yes. All right. So we should have had these vanilla controllers. With the player, it adds these gloved controllers where it has this kind of fancy robotic kind of glove. And when you're touching different things, as it senses it, it'll change the shape of those gloves to match what kind of the general shape your hand is in. And so we're going to add the player to our hierarchy. Then we're going to add this special teleporting prefab, which is really a bunch of scripts that enable tracking. And then we're going to add an area to an object in the scene. So the area, we're actually going to first, this is just more details of what we just said. So we're going to add player, we're going to disable camera rig. And now if we press play, we should see those hands. We're going to add teleporting. And then that has, this is more details of the last slide. That has the jumping around scripting. And we're going to cover area. All right, so. And then to do area teleporting, then we have to have a surface that we're going to jump around on. So I'm going to create a new plane that's going to sit above the floor. And we're going to tell it that we're going to put the script on it called teleport area. And so we can add that through either the add component system or just find that script and drag it on there. So we can find it through the project hierarchy. Project assets. So let's go ahead and get rid of our camera rig. I'm just going to delete it since it didn't seem to work anyway. Hey, where's it going? Delete. There we go. And then the player is under interaction system, core, prefabs, player. So we're going to drag the player in. We get our game window again. And now if I just press play now, we should get those hands. So let's hope that works. Oh, it does not. Well, this is going to be difficult if I can't see my controllers. Because I can't really interact without my controllers working. So we may stop and start SteamVR again. Just let's do that real quick. Everything worked fine, of course, before I moved this computer here. Where's my SteamVR? Just looking for comments while we're waiting here. All right. Maybe let's press play and see if that starts it. Oh, here. There we go. Oh, I see. It wants me to log in. All right. So it wants me to log into my Steam account. Oh, here's VR. So I wonder if not having logged into the Steam account was part of the problem. It says an error occurred. All right, I'm going to quit this one again. And we'll try it again. If anybody has any questions, I'll keep the chat up here for a moment. There's our VR window. But I don't feel we have time to do anything more drastic like rebooting. So if this doesn't work, I'll just discuss it, and I'll tell you how you can learn how to do it, which is suboptimal. All right, I'm going to try one more thing here without rebooting. We'll make sure there's nothing running that shouldn't be running. All right, I think something was running in the background there that was messing it up. Let's give it one last shot here. Otherwise, I will describe what happens and tell you where to go for the rest of it. Oh, I shouldn't be in play mode while I'm doing that. All right, while that's actually trying to start, I will just jump to the slides and then we'll see if it comes back on us. All right, so let me get rid of the chat. All right, so like I said, we're going to do area teleporting. When you do that, the picture here kind of shows there's a blue gridded outline with a square in the center. And then you can jump anywhere inside that plane that we created. So you can create the plane of any size. You notice that you don't want it exactly coplanar with the floor, otherwise the collision detection will hit the floor and it won't know that you're trying to jump to the plane. So the plane has to kind of float a little bit above the floor, but it doesn't have to be visibly and then you add the teleport area script through either of these two ways, and when you press play, you'll get the gloved input and the track controller. And when you press down on the big circle touchpad, an arc will emanate from it, and it'll, wherever it hits the floor, if it's green, you'll jump there. If it's red, it means it's outside the bounds of our play area, which if things work out, we'll get to show you that. The other method that I mentioned is the point teleporting, which requires special jump points. And so there's a prefab in the asset collection. And if you can either drag that prefab actually onto the scene, so you can drag that a bunch of different places, or you can put it in the hierarchy and then move it around and be specific about it. One danger is that if you put them too far away, this arc has a limit of how far it'll go, because if you go higher, as it goes higher, it actually becomes shorter again because it's kind of like a parabola. And so the jump points can't be so far out of the way, or you have to make them steps so that you can get there one after the other. All right, so the next thing that I had hoped to talk about was adding actions. So if we actually can press the button on the touchpad and have that generate some new action or some new objects in the world. I may just use the slides for that if nothing works out. But the way that's done, and there's actually a video of this already out there that my colleague Chauncey has created, and so I'm going to refer you to that anyway for review. But anyway, there's this Windows Steam VR input. We already saw that. That was the screen here, which has the default mappings. We want to add a new one for when we touch the touchpad. And so this is following along essentially with the video that Chauncey created. So I'm going to press this little plus button right here. I'll use the mouse to show it right here as well. And then we're going to create a new one called Touchpad Touch. And then we press the save and generate, which is on this next slide. So I press the plus, it says new action. I'm going to rename that new action up here to Touchpad Touch. And then I press save and generate. And then after I do that, on the other, next to the save and generate button is this open binding UI. So we have this user interface to bind actions we've created with the hardware. And this is where that mapping of between different hardwares comes into play. And when we do that, it actually opens up a web page. So Steam VR is running its own little web page, or Unity is. And that web page has a user interface that lets us do that binding. So it sees that we're running the Vive, so it shows us the Vive controllers, and then it tells us what inputs are there. And by default, there'll be a trackpad input. But after we've added, on the previous page, after we've done this plus and added the trackpad, that'll also be listed down here in the trackpad list. And so we can add that by pressing the plus there. And this part we may still be able to do live, so I can show this part live. And then what we're going to do is we're going to save it with the replace the configuration file and save. All right, so let's go ahead and try that live, even if we don't get our VR again, very disappointingly. All right, so let's go ahead and look at that. So under Window, there's the Steam VR input. We looked at that already. I've already created it here, so I'm just going to create a, we're going to subtract that. We'll get rid of it, and I'll create it again. So we'll hit plus. It says new action. We're going to hit touchpad touching. In other words, you just have your finger resting on the touchpad. And instead of type Boolean, we're going to make that a vector 2, so it's like it's a joystick. It has an X and Y input. And we're going to save and generate that. And then we'll open the binding user interface, which actually starts up a web page. And that's loading. And it's telling me the headset's not detected, which we're unfortunately aware of. We'll try a reset on that while we're waiting. All right, I don't see. Maybe that came up in Google. Nope. Are there chats there? Probably this machine should have been rebooted, but there wasn't a lot of time between here and there. Let me kill Internet Explorer, see if that does it. What's that? All right, well, that's also disappointingly not working. So we won't do that live. We'll do it via slides here. And then I will, again, Chauncey does all this live in his video. I was hoping to do it interactively live. So what you do, and I have slides then, so what you do is you click on the trackpad button here, and you say that you want to interface to the trackpad, and you want to map that to touchpad touch, which is what we created on the Unity side. And so now we're talking about the hardware side. So the actual hardware trackpad will be connected to the Unity touchpad. We click on the little checkbox, we say replace default, and we say save. And then we create a new VR input script, which we're going to put on the player, and we're going to set that to be pointing to our touchpad touch. So let me just talk a little bit about the scripting. Looks like we're running low on time anyway. But I want to talk about the new Steam VR interface. So the new 2.x version of Steam VR has these new action things that go along with this mapping. So instead of the old system, we load valve.vr. That has the Steam VR action type and has different types. So we have vector. And so our touchpad action will return a vector of 2. It has all these actions from our default mapping. How do we want to teleport? Our teleport button, when that's pressed from any of the controllers, right? So if you can have multiple controllers, you can say the left controller, right controller, or any of our devices. We'll set that to be pressed, and then what happens, we're going to print some output just to get us started. And then what we were going to do is get our axis value from touchpad action get axis, And again, input source is any, so we can get the axis of either of the controllers. And then we're going to see if that was not 0, and if it was, print the value. And then finally, we were going to generate a new object. And so this is how you create new objects. On the several slides ago, I'll go back here. I had this new variable at the end called a game object, which is public create me. So any prefab I can create. So a sphere, a cannonball. I was going to show some pottery in this case, but that's not working. Anyway, there's this function called instantiate, and so that's what you take a new prefab, this game object that we have, create me, and you can put it at any place and with any rotation. So we were going to put it wherever the controller is. We were going to give its transformation, or we're going to set it to be a child of the controller, and then call it user created object. So we're going to give it a name, and that puts a new object into the hierarchy. And that was what I was going to wrap up with. As I said, there are plenty more resources. So on the Unity side, there's a virtual reality toolkit, which has a lot more user interface things like sliders and rotational user interfaces. And so that does a lot of that kind of fancy stuff. It also did like some of the teleport stuff, which is now built into Unity. So kind of that part of that is now redundant. Chauncey earlier in the semester talked about Google Poly and how to interface that. And he also has a video on that. So the final thing then for our resources is that Chauncey, a member of the AVL team, has this, we have an AVL Tube subscription on YouTube. And these are, so far, he's got 7 newly created Unity tool tutorials based on this brand new method of interfacing with Steam. And so some of the scripting stuff I showed today is from lecture 4, or his tutorial 4. So you'll see a little bit of similarity, although since he wasn't live, his work's fine on the video. And I was hoping to kind of reinforce that with our live demonstration today. He also has some augmented reality things. So he has a couple on Vuforia and one for the HoloLens. And then he has, goes more into depth and some like how to create a new terrain and how to use Google Poly. Again, he has a video on that. So how to use that. So that is the end. My apologies for the sort of catastrophic failure here. I think probably if I had rebooted the computer, we would have got it solved, but that would have had a big empty time in the middle of the lecture, and we were running late anyway. So let me check the chat, see if anybody has any questions. Margaret, do you have any questions there? It's hard to ask questions when things didn't work. It didn't work too well during the demo. So one of the big things, I mean, the big takeaway here is that Unity is increasingly adding features to VR to make it as easy as possible for people to kind of just jump right in and do it. Yeah, Margaret.
The difference between teleporting or something about this area.
Right. So Margaret's asking about the different types of teleporting. So let me bring up the pictures for that. Oh, yes, right. So yeah, she's asking why you might use one versus the other. So there's make that bigger. There's a couple of reasons why you might use one versus the other. So, oh, sorry. Oops, wrong mouse. Okay. So I have both of them in this view here, this lower right view. You can see the square outline, and then beyond the square are 3 little hops that you can go to. If you want to just use the hops, one of the main reasons you might do that is you have, say, 360 captures that you've made of the real world. So if you go to the Valve, the lab tutorial, and they have some photogrammetry scenes like in the mountains, and you can kind of walk around a little bit of that area, but around the ridge, of course, the photogrammetry wasn't very good. So they limited you to move around in a certain little area. Then they also provided little hops where they did more, like did photospheres, right? So you could jump there to where a photosphere was done, then you can look around, but you can't walk around because they only captured it from that one region. So you might use photospheres at each of these little hops, or if you have a game, there might be reasons why you're constricting people to certain areas. But I think the primary reason is that you have more detail that you can see from those, and you're trying to hide lack of detail from the user so they don't go somewhere where, you know, they can see behind the props or behind the, you know, setting scenery. But the two work together. So you know, here you could jump around if you had the where this rectangle is. It would be a green thing there, and then if you go out here in this area, you'd get a little red X that says you can't jump there. But then as you get close to here, it kind of pops in, so it kind of locks into when you get to one of these arrow things, and then a little arrow. You can kind of see the arrow here and over here, and those show you that you can go to those areas. Good question. All right, so let me go back to the beginning and reiterate that tomorrow at the Wells Library, Matt and Tassie will be talking about Create Your Own VR Tour. And then next week on Thursday, Jeff Rogers of the AVL will be giving the XR Extravaganza, also in the Wells Library at 4 o'clock. And otherwise, our sessions for the virtual reality workshop are over. And these are all recorded, again, except for maybe one of the expeditions. We didn't have a good capture of that, but all the other ones are recorded, and most of them are online at our Canvas page, and the rest of them will be as soon as they're sent to me from our media group. And otherwise, any other questions? I don't see any. Nope. All right. I guess that's it.
Thank you so much, Bill, for organizing all of these wonderful workshops. We
All right.
look forward to what's happening.
Should I give you the microphone, Margaret? All right. The end. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so I sent in my reminder email today, I mentioned this, but if you have any ideas for what you want us to talk about in the future, go ahead and send myself or Tassie emails of what you'd like us to be talking about, and we'll see what we do. We don't have anything selected necessarily for next fall. We will be teaching a scientific visualization class as part of a regular curriculum. Otherwise, yes, please send me an email or send it to VizHelp. There we go. VizHelp@iu.edu.